From trauma to joie de vivre. How is that possible? Welcome to Post-Trauma Secrets and Decluttering, where we go behind the scene and reveal how to free yourself. Come and discover the 4 dimensions of a decluttering journey with your hosts, Valerie and JM Tetro.
Welcome, wonderful souls, to the episode number 9, How Trauma Affects the Brain. Disclaimer here, Valerie and I are not medical professionals, but we have experience and we've learned. And we'll discuss today about how the trauma affect the brain from our own experience and what we know. So I just want to start with one thing. I've heard many times that any trauma will lead to a PTSD. So this is not what we're talking about, because PTSD is a diagnosis. It's criteria that gives the label of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm just talking about trauma, which means someone has lived a traumatic event and is affected in some level or different ways. So we know that trauma affects us and change something. We've seen it.
Just one example. When we were living in Ottawa, we met with Dr. Joseph Lawrence. He was working at the Broadview Medical Health Center, and his clinic was all about helping people that suffer from brain injury, concussion, trauma, how to rehabilitate. So it was really, really inspiring because it was really showing that it's possible to heal the brain. But if we're talking about healing the brain, that's mean the brain had been changed. The brain had been affected by the trauma. So when we had a discussion with us, he pointed out that when someone had a trauma, the frontal lobe of the brain, so that's the part right in front of your brain, that part called the frontal lobe is affected, and this is an issue where people have the executive functioning. What do you mean by executive function? We mean self-care, self-worth, environment care, things like that. So that came back to clutter. How come we accumulate clutter when we had a trauma? Hey, let's talk a bit about the executive function. Dr. Thomas E. Brown separated them into 6 different clusters.
Just talking about the first one, the organizing, prioritizing, and activating for a task. I've seen someone, a good friend, he was a member working with me in the military, coming back from Afghanistan. And he was one of the most organized corporal we've seen. And when he came back, we reassigned his duty, but everything was coming out of his office or his day upside down. Really, anything was just reversed. And we went after some time to try to help and see what was going on. And he was not able to prioritize or organize anymore. So what we had to do is relearn with him. So we've seen that he was affected and he was diagnosed with PTSD. So we know that it changed the organization, and that's what it means.
Wow. The second executive function is focusing, sustaining, and shifting attention to tasks. So in addition of being able to organize and prioritize, to be able to achieve a task, you need to be able to focus on it. And I had difficulty for years with that. I was wondering if I was ADHD, I was passing from one task to another and multitasking, and it was difficult to arrive at the end of my task because I was passing from one task to another. But after working on really being able to focus and sustain and rewired my brain for these, today I'm able to sit and work for a couple hours in a row. My focus is totally there.
Wow. How many of you think the focus was affected by a trauma either with you or someone else. This is amazing. Third is regulating alertness, sustaining effort, and processing speed. Well, I do have another story experience. Someone was coming back from a war field, and for 6 months and more, he was trained, as they all do, but this one was really affected, and he was trained to react with red flag because it means it's minefield. So he went to a farmer's field, and there was red flag, and every time down all the keywords, a minefield, and it was so intense. We had to intervene, pretend that it's normal because he was trained for it, and his muscle memory would tell him to do it instantly. But in this case, he would fall in panic attack and an anxiety crisis, very severe, and make him switch. So the trauma really affect how you're alert, how you react to a behavior or something around you.
This is when we see sometimes that, I have a flashback, or there's a trigger that affect me and I react right away because my alertness is difficult to regulate. That's an amazing story. Another story was, and maybe not a story, but how many of you feel sometimes that you have difficulty managing your emotion? And being some frustrated can come like a wave. How many of you feels like that sometimes? So the fourth executive function is totally about that. It's about managing frustration and modulating emotions. Those are just big words to say being able to manage your emotion and don't be right away in anger and aggressive mode, and it's not everybody that get that after a trauma, but some people, their frontal lobe in that section is a bit more affected, and it's more difficult to manage the emotion.
One very interesting thing we've seen with regulating the emotion and frustration is a doctor that was working on neurological function was able to change a traumatic the brain, so the person was able to regulate more the emotion. So we know we can work the way back. This is very interesting. The fifth one is utilizing working memory and accessing recall. Well, I'm sure all of you I've seen under stress how your short and long-term memory is so hard to get back. It's frustrating at times. Well, the trauma, in my word, is like this times 100 because it changed, it rewired everything. So any emotional slightly more than normal is like a super stress, a mega nova stress, which means everything is hard to access. And again, we've seen that it's workable. We can work the way back, but it did affect the brain.
Yeah, how many times I was sad because I was not remember her first kiss, for example, because I was in a phase where my trauma was affecting me. And it's like in a movie, you want to remember that first kiss that you get with your loved one. And I was so frustrated because I was not able to access that memory. And in exchange, I had other memories or flashbacks that were coming right at me. So I remember what I don't want to remember, and I wasn't able to remember what I want to remember. So the last executive function is monitoring and self-regulating action. So this is all about self-care. So there's a lot of people affected by trauma that section of the brain is affected. And it's more difficult to take a shower every single day. It's more difficult to brush your teeth, to change clothes every single day. And at the same time, it's not just on personal care, it's also in the environmental care. So it's more difficult to clean up our house. It's more difficult to pass the vacuum, to put the garbage in the trash can. And this is another place where clutter can start to accumulate. But we know for sure, because I live it, and I know that it's possible to rewire the brain in a way that it's not affected anymore. And the person is able to have appropriate self-care and be proud and feel good in her body or his body, and be able to manage all the home also.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so amazing because I know it's a hard subject, but we've seen so much progress in the people that we follow and we help with the decluttering journey, because we remove what is hard for them and what is preventing them from being better.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this episode. If you want to help break the trauma stigma, share this episode and give hope to your friends and let them know it is possible to get free from trauma. Valerie and JM want to help you further by offering you Declutter Your Life 101. Be sure to go to dowellht.com/free yourself. That's dowellht.com/free yourself to get your free quick summary and start your decluttering journey. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next time to discover another secret on Post-Trauma Secrets and Decluttering.